It began with an ordinary home in North Carolina. A place where a mother and her son should have felt the safest. Instead, it became the last place anyone could say they had seen them. When Susan Osborne and her son, Evan Chartrand, suddenly vanished, there were no desperate phone calls, no confirmed sightings, and no clear explanation for where they had gone. At first, investigators believed they were searching for two missing people. But as they uncovered what had been happening behind the walls of that quiet home, the investigation took a chilling turn. One that would leave a family searching for answers, and force detectives to ask a terrifying question. What if Susan and Evan had never left that life behind? What if someone had taken it from them? Years later, despite a murder conviction, one heartbreaking mystery remains unsolved. Susan Osborne and Evan Chartrand have never been found. And to this day, no one knows where they are. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Every victim we talk about had dreams, people who loved them, and a future they expected to live. If you believe their stories deserve to be remembered, and not forgotten, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Your support allows us to continue bringing these forgotten cases back into the light. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Before Susan Osborne became the focus of one of North Carolina's most haunting missing persons cases, she was simply a mother. Like millions of parents across America, she was trying to build a life for the people she loved. Living with her was her son, Evan Chartrand. He was still young, with a future that, at least from the outside, seemed full of possibility. No one looking at the two of them would have imagined that one day, both would disappear without leaving behind a single confirmed trace. The family lived in Holt, a small community in North Carolina. It wasn't the kind of place people expected to see on national news. Neighbors knew each other. Life moved quietly. The streets looked ordinary. And nothing about the house suggested it would one day become the center of a murder investigation. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind closed doors, the family had been dealing with problems that few outsiders fully understood. Those closest to them would later describe growing tension inside the home. Arguments. Strained relationships. A household that wasn't nearly as peaceful as it appeared from the outside. Still, family disagreements are common. They happen every day. And investigators would later make one thing very clear. Nothing publicly known at the time suggested Susan and Evan were about to vanish. Which is exactly why what happened next shocked everyone who knew them. Within days, the quiet home that had blended into the neighborhood for years would become the center of a mystery that investigators are still trying to fully answer. And it all began with an unexplained silence. For a while, nothing seemed unusual. Life in Holt carried on as it always had. Neighbors went to work. Children played outside. And the Osborne home remained just another house on a quiet North Carolina road. Then, Susan stopped answering her phone. Family members called again. No answer. They sent messages. Nothing. As the days passed, the silence became impossible to ignore. Soon, they realized something wasn't right. Susan wasn't the kind of person to disappear without telling those closest to her. And neither was Evan. The pair hadn't contacted friends. They hadn't reached out to relatives. It was as if they had simply vanished. At first, loved ones searched for ordinary explanations. Maybe they had gone away unexpectedly. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe they just needed time alone. But as more days slipped by, those possibilities became harder to believe. Concern soon turned into fear. The family contacted law enforcement. What began as a welfare check quickly became a missing persons investigation. Detectives started asking the same questions everyone else was asking. Where were Susan and Evan? Who had seen them last? And why had they disappeared without taking the lives they had built behind? As investigators retraced their final known movements, every path seemed to lead back to one place. The family home. The very place where Susan and Evan had last been known to be. What detectives found wasn't a clear answer. Instead, it was the beginning of a mystery that would grow darker with every passing day. Because the next person investigators needed to speak with was someone who claimed to know exactly what had happened. But the more he talked, the less his story seemed to make sense. As the investigation gathered momentum, detectives turned their attention to the one person who should have known exactly what had happened. Susan's husband, Peter Chadwick Osborne. When investigators first spoke with him, he offered an explanation. Susan and Evan, he said, had left. At first glance, it sounded possible. Adults sometimes walk away. Families separate. People start over. But experienced detectives know one important rule. The truth doesn't change. As investigators continued asking questions, Peter's account began to shift. Small details no longer matched earlier statements. Timelines became harder to follow. Some explanations created even more questions than answers. That alone wasn't enough to prove a crime had been committed. People under stress can forget details. Memories fade. Confusion happens. But detectives couldn't ignore what they were seeing. Because every time they believed they were getting closer to the truth, the story changed again. Meanwhile, investigators were quietly building their own timeline. They interviewed neighbors. They spoke with relatives. They reviewed records. They examined everything they could to reconstruct Susan and Evan's final days. And little by little, a very different picture began to emerge. Instead of finding evidence that a mother and her son had willingly disappeared, detectives began asking a far more disturbing question. What if they had never chosen to leave at all? The investigation was no longer centered on finding two missing people. It was becoming an investigation into what may have happened inside that quiet North Carolina home. And then, detectives uncovered evidence they believed changed everything. Before we continue, if stories like Susan and Evan's matter to you, there's one simple way you can help. By liking this video, you're helping YouTube recommend these forgotten cases to more people, keeping the victims' stories alive and ensuring they're never lost to time. Thank you for being here. Because what investigators discovered next would turn this missing persons case into something far darker than anyone had imagined. For weeks, investigators searched for one thing: a sign that Susan Osborne and Evan Chartrand were still alive. Every interview, every phone record, every lead brought them back to the same question: what really happened inside that house? Then, the investigation took a dramatic turn. As detectives examined the evidence collected throughout the case, they reached a conclusion that would forever change the direction of their investigation. They no longer believed Susan and Evan had chosen to disappear. They believed they had been victims of foul play. It was a heartbreaking realization, not only for investigators, but for the family members who had spent months hoping they would receive a phone call, a message, or even the smallest sign that Susan and Evan were still alive. Instead, hope was slowly being replaced by a devastating possibility. The evidence detectives had gathered pointed them toward one suspect: Peter Osborne. Authorities believed the truth wasn't hidden somewhere far away. They believed it had been hidden much closer to home. Yet one enormous problem remained. There were no bodies. No confirmed crime scene that could tell the entire story. No witness who had seen exactly what happened. Only a growing collection of forensic evidence, witness statements, timelines, and inconsistencies that investigators believed all pointed in the same direction. For most murder cases, recovering the victims is one of the most important pieces of the investigation. This case was different. Detectives were preparing to do something incredibly rare: ask a jury to convict someone of murder, without ever finding the people they believed had been killed. It was a risk. One that would require investigators to prove that the absence of Susan and Evan was itself part of the evidence. And soon, a courtroom would decide whether they had succeeded. The decision to move forward shocked many people. Not because investigators believed they had the wrong suspect, but because they were preparing to prosecute one of the most difficult types of murder cases imaginable: a case without bodies. For prosecutors, the challenge was enormous. How do you convince 12 jurors that 2 people are dead, when neither of them has ever been found? The answer would come through thousands of hours of investigation. Detectives reconstructed timelines. They analyzed forensic evidence. They interviewed witnesses. And they carefully pieced together what they believed had happened inside that North Carolina home. Each piece of evidence, by itself, told only part of the story. But together, prosecutors argued they revealed a single, unavoidable truth. When the trial began, the courtroom became the final battleground. The prosecution laid out its case. The defense challenged the evidence. Without Susan and Evan, every detail mattered. Every statement, every timeline, every inconsistency. The jury would have to decide whether the evidence proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After hearing days of testimony and reviewing the evidence presented before them, the jury reached its verdict. Peter Chadwick Osborne was found guilty of the murders of Susan Osborne and Evan Chartrand. For investigators, it marked the end of years of relentless work. For the family, it brought justice, but not peace. Because even after the verdict, the question that had haunted everyone since the very beginning still remained unanswered. Where are Susan and Evan? Years have passed. Searches have come and gone. But their loved ones are still waiting for the one answer the courtroom could never provide. The trial may have revealed who the jury believed was responsible, but it could not reveal where a mother and her son were taken. And that missing piece continues to haunt this case to this very day. Justice. For many families, that word means the end of a long and painful journey. But for Susan Osborne's loved ones, justice was only part of the story. Today, the place where Susan and Evan spent what investigators believe were their final moments still exists. The roads are still there. The neighborhood is still quiet. People still drive past, unaware that one of North Carolina's most haunting mysteries unfolded behind those walls. Although Peter Osborne was convicted of their murders, one heartbreaking truth has never changed. Susan Osborne has never been found. Neither has her son, Evan Chartrand. Imagine living with that uncertainty. Never having a grave to visit. Never knowing where your loved one truly rests. Never being able to say one final goodbye. For the families left behind, that is a pain that doesn't end when a trial is over. It simply learns to live alongside the unanswered questions. Cases like this remind us that some mysteries are solved only in part. A courtroom may decide who is responsible, but it cannot always reveal every secret. Sometimes, the most important answers disappear with the victims themselves. Perhaps one day, someone will remember something they once believed didn't matter. Perhaps one day, new evidence will emerge. And perhaps one day, Susan and Evan will finally be brought home. Until then, their story remains unfinished. If this documentary moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe every missing person's case deserves to remain in the public eye until every question has been answered? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Every conversation helps keep these stories alive. Susan Osborne wasn't just a case number. She was a mother. Evan Chartrand wasn't simply another missing person. He was a son. They laughed. They dreamed. They had plans for the future, just like the rest of us. And that is exactly why their story deserves to be remembered. Because behind every true crime documentary, there are real people whose voices can no longer tell their own story. So we remember them. We speak their names. And we refuse to let them be forgotten. In memory of Susan Osborne, Evan Chartrand. Some mysteries aren't forgotten because they're famous, they're remembered because someone is still waiting for the truth.